Hello, good people of YouTube. Mountbatten here. Before we get into today's video, I just want to give a shout out to Griefer. I was on his podcast, Salt, Ships, and Scuttlebutt, where we talk about Warships and Warships-centric things, not just Warships. If you want to check that out, link to that will be in the description down below. We had a very long, very interesting, very fun conversation about 11.6, the economy rework, submarines, carriers, all the things we all love to talk about when talking about Warships. So please go give that a listen to in the description down below. Again, that is where you can find the link for that. Alright, so in today's video, we are talking about a ship that in my mind doesn't make any sense, especially in the way it's been balanced and some of the decisions around what exactly this ship is, and that is what you're seeing on screen, the Tier 8 Premium Japanese Hybrid Cruiser, the Tone. Now, the Tone is not an old ship in the game. It's getting up there in age, though. She is among the first hybrids that were introduced all the way back when the Issei was introduced in the game, not but a few months ago. I think we're maybe coming upon a year of that, and we got the Issei, the Tone, and the Kearsarge in very quick succession. We haven't really seen too many more hybrid ships get introduced into the game. Hybrids meaning that they have planes and artillery equipped on them. You can use those as both main damage dealers when you're playing these ships. Now, the Tone is a real still historical ship. She was a ship that really existed, but the planes that she carries in game aren't really the planes that she carried in real life, and they aren't used in the manner in which they were used in real life. They were mostly used for scouting and weather reporting, and not for actually attacking other surface ships. Interestingly enough, they are the same planes that the I-400, the aircraft carrier submarine that the Japanese built, would be equipped with, potentially hinting at what might be coming in the future and what I think is probably coming in the future. Now, the Tone is a real still historical ship, and she has quite the long service life. Well, for a Japanese ship during World War II with the Japanese Navy. She was present from the beginning, from the attack on Pearl Harbor all the way through the Pacific campaign, and she was present for the Battle of Midway. In fact, it was the reconnaissance aircraft from the Tone that spotted the American ships during the Battle of Midway. That information was then relayed back to Nagumo, who he then made that very crucial decision to start to outfit the ships, the aircraft with munitions to engage ships rather than the land bases at Midway. So then when the American planes showed up to the Japanese carrier fleet, they were in the middle of refitting their aircraft with torpedoes rather than with bombs, and then, well, history took its course. And she was present for, again, much more of the war, all the way up to the bombing of Curie, where she was then sunk by the Americans, and where her fate was then sealed. She was later scrapped from that position in the sunken harbor in Curie until 1948, and we have her in game. Now, the Tone is joined in Tier 8 by probably one of the most well-known premium ships in game, and the oldest premium in game, which is the Atago, the other Tier 8 premium Japanese heavy cruiser. We'll talk more about the Atago and the Tone as we go on. So, the Tone isn't a ship that I really run into too much anymore. Even when I was playing, I played the ship quite a lot today, getting background footage for this video. I did not run across a single Tone, which Matchmaking is supposed to try and match you beat for beat on the other team. I say it's supposed to because that's what Wargaming says, but that doesn't always happen. But if I was going to run to a Tone, playing a Tone is probably the best way to ensure that that happens, and it didn't happen then, and I can remember the last time I saw another Tone. I think it was on stream a couple weeks ago when I ran into one. I was pretty shocked that I saw it because it's really not a popular ship. I'm sure many a player probably purchased it because it is a real still historical ship that was present for most of the war in the Pacific on the Japanese side and is a pretty well-known ship. But when it comes down to it, this ship, in my opinion, isn't really that great. Now, it's not terrible, but some decisions were made in her balancing progress, or time, whatever you want to call it, her balancing process, that just don't really make too much sense for me. Now, of course, the highlight of the ship is that she can launch aircraft, torpedo bombers. even though in real life, again, she was never fitted with torpedo bombers. Her planes were meant for scouting and weather reporting, not for attacking. And like I said earlier, the aircraft are in fact those of the I-400 and not of the Tone. But in game, you can use them to launch torpedoes because, again, weather reporting ships aren't really that. Weather reporting aircraft aren't that important in World of Warships. Scouting aircraft, I think you could have had a nice type of gimmick here where she had a abnormally long scouting plane that could maybe have an improved vision of scouting. But again, the torpedo planes are neat. But the torpedo planes that you have on the Tone are the same torpedo planes that you have on the VIII down in Tier 6. They are literally the same. They are only slightly faster because she has a longer engine boost time on the planes than the VIII does. But other than that, they're the same amount of hit points. They travel at the same speed, again, except for the engine boost because it is a little bit longer on the Tone. They drop the same amount of torpedoes. They drop the same torpedoes. And these torpedoes, too, if you manage to somehow get a ship to eat every single one of these torpedoes, it literally does the same amount of damage as one torpedo from the Shiryatsu. That's it. All 8 of these torps. So they're not very high damage torps either. Now, you might be thinking, okay, so whatever, you get to launch planes every 2 minutes, and you still are, almost guaranteed to get at least a few thousand damage every 2 minutes. That would be cool, except it's not every 2 minutes. For some reason, they gave the Tone a 3-minute cooldown time on her aircraft, or 3 minutes recharge time on her aircraft, which I don't really see how they thought that was a good idea. Now, I can see why they did it, because the Tone is equipped with a pretty nice set of guns for a Tier 8 cruiser. She has the same caliber of gun that the Atago has, 203mm gun. She only has 8 of them, though, and they're all for the superstructure. You got 2 that face the front, 2 that face astern, and they reload in the build that I'm running 16 seconds. They have a 180 time of 25 seconds, maximum spread of 123 meters. They are very accurate, and she has a maximum range of 15.7 kilometers. Which, if you're comparing it to the Atago right there, is pretty similar. It's pretty much the same guns that the Atago has, except you have 2 less. The Atago has 10 guns. The Tone here has 8. Which, again, at Tier 8, that's not the worst thing in the world. But considering that the Atago has a 16-second reload time with 10 guns, and yet you're stuck here with the same 16-second reload time on the Tone with less guns. But on top of that, too, she does also have torpedoes. She has 10-kilometer torps, 4x3 610mm torps that reload in 76 seconds, so a pretty quick reload time there. They do a maximum damage of 19,818, which is a quite a heavy punch for a cruiser-borne torpedo to have. At Tier 8, they travel at 62 knots, and they're detectable from 1.6 kilometers away. So you have a pretty decent set of guns on top of having, well, the good old Japanese torpedoes, despite that the torpedo angles are quite terrible, but given the other attributes of the Tone, which is an 8.8 kilometer detection range, which is incredibly good, you can actually stealth torpedo in this thing, and you have guns that are pretty darn good. They do have the Japanese HE, the good old Japanese HE alpha, and high fire chance for their gun caliber. So, on that right there, that aspect right there, you're doing pretty good. But the planes are really what holds the ship back, in my opinion, because you can only use them every 3 minutes. You give up a lot for these planes, too, in terms of your gun placement. You don't have any guns on the stern part of your ship, of course, because it's occupied with the flight facilities. So when you're doing what Japanese cruisers are best at, which is kiting, you have to show an uncomfortable amount of broadside to get your guns off. Despite the guns having pretty decent gun angles, the armor on the Tone is worse than the Atago. Much worse than the Atago. The deck armor, for instance, on the Atago, you have a much thicker deck. You get a very nice 41mm deck on the Atago. That's a very nice deck for a Tier 8 heavy cruiser to have. On the Tone, that deck is instead replaced with a 27mm deck. And then if you look at the citadel of the Otago and the Tone citadel is much bigger. It's absolutely massive for a cruiser to have. Now, the Otago, as I'm sure many of you that have played or shot at the Otago know, it's not exactly a hard ship. The Citadel by any stretch of the imagination. But the Citadel is still smaller than the Tones. Okay, so just there, you have worse deck armor, you have a worse Citadel than the Otago, a ship that's already extremely easily Citadeled. But you do have heals, and you do get 5 of them with Superintendent. Granted, from my experience, though, when you do get slapped in this ship, you get slapped hard, and of course it's Citadel damage, and it's not like it's a specialized repair that heals more Citadel damage than a normal repair. So, you give all that up for these planes. Now, like I said a few minutes ago, those planes are exactly the same planes that the Issei has down at Tier 6. Now, if you've seen Issei or played Issei, you know that the planes aren't incredibly durable. They get by in Tier 6 because at Tier 6 you're still in that era of ships that for the most part are either interwar ships or the very early World War II ships that don't have a ton of AA guns. They're not bristling with AA. But once you get up to Tier 8, you are in that mid to late-ish war stage of ships. Ships that are absolutely coated with AA. You've got Kidd. You've got, God, I don't know, all the American cruisers at this tier. You can run to the Alaska, the American battleships. You can run into Tier 10 ships at Tier 8. So you get up to Tier 10 with the same place that you have on a Tier 6 ship that are incredibly frail. They do as much damage as one Shiratsu torpedo. If you land all 8 torpedoes, and given the nature of the aiming reticle, which, again, despite it being a Tier 8 ship, it has the same reticle that the Issei has, to where the torpedoes do not converge, they diverge, to where there's very, very, very slim chance that you can actually get all these torpedoes to hit one target. And if you did do that, again, you're doing essentially 1 torpedo's worth of damage to a ship. So you give up all of that for the ability to maybe get 4,000 damage every 3 minutes. And again, too, the 3-minute timer is what really throws me for a loop here with the Tone, because it just doesn't make any sense. These are planes that are incredibly frail, that get shredded incredibly easily, and instead of maybe tweaking them slightly to where you can emphasize that, hey, this is a higher tier ship or something like that, they just say, no, we're going to add a whole another minute onto the cooldown time. Now, again, I get it's got good torpedoes, it's got pretty decent guns, but you could have, made the planes a little more durable, give them a little bit more HP, maybe give them an engine boost consumable, maybe a heal on them, or just change the reticle to where the torpedoes either, they don't even have to converge, where the torpedoes just travel straight afterwards and don't diverge with the Tone. But no, they didn't do any of that. So at the end of the day, what you get stuck with is an 8-gun Otago that's slightly stealthier, that has planes that can maybe do, again, 4,000 to 5,000 damage every 3 minutes. Maybe, if you can even get them through the flak of Tier 8 and 10 ships. Which then leads me to my conclusion, is that if you want a Tier 8 premium Japanese cruiser, get the Otago. It's so much better to do, so much better at being a Tier 8 cruiser than the Tone. Now, again, the Tone is not bad. I've had some decent games in it, but it's pretty frustrating when you're in a Tier 8 game and your planes are pretty much glorified spotting planes. And true, you can spot with the planes, but all the time you're spending spotting with the planes, it's so much less time that you're spending using the guns of the ship, which are really good. The guns are really good, and I would say that it would be a pretty good gunboat. But then you have the Otago there with 2 more guns, the same reload, and much more convenient gun positioning and gun angles. And the same torpedoes too. A little bit bigger of a detection radius, but it's still like 9.3 kilometers. And the detection range is very nice. It's true, very nice for the Tone. But just like I was mentioning with, I believe, the Marseille and the Duncan, who both have good detection range, it's very nice until you get into a CV game to where that's just, thrown out the window because the CV can just fly over and spot you. Anyway, so I don't see why they just made this ship a slightly where's Atago, and then strap some planes to it that every 3 minutes you can do a few thousand damage. Again, they could have done something a little bit different. The planes made them a bit more interesting, but no. And plus, too, I don't think cruisers are very well suited to be hybrid ships anyway. Cruisers are the damage dealers in this game. They have accurate guns, they have consistent guns, they have faster reload than battleships. But battleships, they have the ability, when you give them these torpedo planes or these rocket planes in the case of the Kearsarge, they can, of course, encourage that ship to move, and then you can also use the guns on your ship that, if you, let's say, attack them in such a way in which they force you force that target to turn broadside onto you, then like in the VIII, you've got 8 14-inch guns ready to go and ready to punish their broadside now that they've had to turn to avoid the torpedoes. In the Kearsarge, you got 12 16-inch guns ready to punish them if they turn to try and avoid your rocket planes. It's a much more tactical tool in those ships. Plus, too, the Kearsarge's planes are appropriate for its tier, and the VIII's planes are these planes, but at tier 6, where they can actually get stuff done. So the Tonite to me just doesn't make much sense as to why it is the way that it is. It's just very confusing. I know some players really do enjoy the ship, and again, the guns are very good. I just don't see why you'd want to play this thing when the Atago exists, because again, you're giving up so much for those planes that do so little damage that, again, you could just be better off in an Atago, and I love the Atago. Atago's a great boat. When I reviewed the Tone the first time, I hadn't played the Atago. I immediately played the Atago after the Tone review, and I haven't touched the Tone since then, until I came and sat down to do this, a look-back video at the Tone. And again, it's like, yeah, these guns are good and all, these torpedoes are nice and all, but I wish I had better gun placement and better gun angles, and behold, the Atago gives you that at the cost of a slight increase to your detection, and you even get a better armor layout with the Atago. Again, you still get chunked in the Atago, but I mean, still, it's less than you do in this thing. So, yeah, the Tone is a ship that I don't understand the decisions that they made with it, why they didn't tweak some things that needed to be tweaked, but yeah. It's a ship that, it's a real historical ship. I think it's neat that it's in the game, but I wouldn't recommend getting this thing over the Atago. If you got the Atago, maybe you want to play like a little side grade to the Atago, or something that's a little bit different than the Atago, but still in the same vein of it, sure, I could see that. But again, if you're looking for a tier 8 Japanese premium ship or premium cruiser, Atago's the way to go. There's no questions about that. So guys, hope you guys enjoyed this look back at the Tone. If you did, make sure to drop a like, leave a comment, subscribe to the channel. One way to 40,000 subscribers, and I can't thank you guys enough for that. Hope you have a wonderful Monday. Have a wonderful week. Hope to catch you guys in the next one.